42 days into a solo race around the world, sailor Thomas Ruyant hits something in the dark. The hull splits open, water starts pouring in. Coast Guard records show no wreck at that position, no island, no shoal, no other vessel nearby. Officially, there was nothing out there. Sailors call these encounters something else. Ghost containers, steel boxes that fall off cargo ships and disappear, sometimes for good, sometimes not. Nobody even agrees on how many go missing each year. Official counts have swung from 221 to nearly 1,500 in 2 years alone. But the more interesting question isn't how many there are. It's what actually happens to one of them after it hits the water. This is Blind Spot, where we find what's hiding in plain sight. Before the ghost phase, there's an even simpler question. How does a fully lashed steel box end up in the water in the first place? Human error and bad stacking happen, but most of the big losses trace back to something with a name almost nobody's heard: parametric rolling. It happens when a wave hits a massive ship's bow at just the wrong angle, and the ship's stability starts pulsing in sync with the waves. Within a few cycles, a gentle roll can turn into a violent 30 or even 40-degree sway, enough to snap steel lashings built to hold thousands of pounds apiece. In November 2020, a single Pacific storm cost one ship over 1,800 containers this way in a single night. A few months later, another vessel on the same crossing lost 750 more in a separate storm. That's the push. What happens next is where it gets strange. The obvious assumption is that a container sinks immediately. Steel box, heavy cargo, straight to the bottom. Except a shipping container is basically a sealed steel room, and sealed rooms don't fill with water instantly. Whether it goes down right away depends on three things: how heavy the cargo is, how well the doors are sealed, and how much air gets trapped inside when it hits the surface. Machinery or canned goods, and a fully loaded box, some weigh over 60,000 pounds, is usually gone within minutes. Anything lighter, and the container has a second act first. That second act should worry sailors more than it does. A floating container doesn't bob on top of the water like a boat. It rides just beneath the surface, a foot, sometimes less, of steel poking through the waves. No lights, no flag, barely a ripple. Refrigerated containers, sealed almost airtight to keep cargo cold, can drift like this for months. To a radar operator, it's nothing. To a sailboat moving at 8 knots in the dark, it's a steel wall with no warning at all. The sport of ocean racing keeps its own informal record of this. World Sailing has logged at least 8 cases where a crew abandoned their boat entirely after colliding with something believed to be a floating container. Not only damaged, not delayed, abandoned. Eventually, though, the ghost phase ends. Water finds its way in through door seals, vents, and the small holes corrosion eventually punches into steel. Once enough gets inside to outweigh the trapped air, buoyancy gives out, and the container drops. Some go down within days, some take over a year. Either way, once it starts sinking, that's usually the last anyone ever sees of it, which is exactly where this gets interesting again, because almost nobody actually checks what happens next. In 2004, off the coast of California, a container full of steel-belted tires sank inside the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary. One of 15 lost by the same ship in a single storm. Because it happened to land inside a protected research zone, scientists could actually go back and check. 7 years later, a robotic submarine found it sitting over 1,000 meters down, barely corroded. The cold, low-oxygen water had slowed the rust almost to a stop. And it hadn't just sat there. Tube worms, scallops, snails, and sea squirts had colonized the hard steel surface, the kind of animals that need something solid to grow on in an otherwise muddy seafloor. For a moment, it looked like the romantic version of this story. Junk becomes reef. Except it wasn't that simple. The species you'd actually expect on a reef, sponges, soft corals, the animals divers associate with a thriving hard-bottom habitat, never showed up. And the container wasn't neutral either. It blocked bottom currents, gave predators a new perch to hunt from, and the seafloor around it, for hundreds of meters out, had noticeably fewer species than areas untouched by it. Not an artificial reef, not a dead zone either. Something in between that scientists are still trying to fully explain. And that's just from the one container anyone's actually gone back to study. But the container itself isn't even the strangest part of this story, because it isn't actually the end of it. What's inside doesn't always share its fate. In 1992, a storm knocked several containers off a cargo ship in the North Pacific. One of them held 28,800 plastic bath toys, rubber ducks, turtles, beavers, frogs. The container itself probably sank not long after. The toys didn't. Oceanographer Curtis Ebesmeyer started tracking where they turned up, feeding every reported sighting into a computer model called OSCURS, originally built to track fish populations, to reconstruct exactly which currents the toys had ridden. Hawaii, Alaska, frozen into Arctic sea ice. Then, more than a decade later, beaches in Maine and Scotland, thousands of miles from where they fell, barely degraded, some fetching up to $1,000 from collectors by the time they turned up. The container that carried them vanished, quickly and predictably. Its cargo went on a journey that lasted over a decade and crossed an entire ocean. And Curtis Ebesmeyer was by far the only one watching. Until January 2026, there was no legal requirement for a ship to even report that a container had gone overboard, let alone where. New international rules finally changed that this year, but only going forward. Everything that fell before it is still exactly where physics left it, unlogged, unmapped, and, in almost every case, never looked at again. Thomas Ruyant made it back to shore that night, his hull held barely. But what hit him is still unknown. No wreckage was ever recovered, no report ever confirmed it. It might have been drifting just under the surface for months by then, the way containers do. It might already be 1,000 meters down, slowly getting colonized by something with no name yet. Nobody's ever going to know for sure, and this is just one blind spot among many. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one.